Reading from the book of Psalms, Psalm 100, a psalm of thanksgiving. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. If you would please stand, if you are able, for the gospel reading. Reading from the 9th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, the call of Matthew, the tax collector. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." These are the words of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen. You may be seated.
Who are they for you? I know you have them. Saints. Maybe not formally recognized by any church or any denomination, but nonetheless saints. As we go through this month of thank you notes, I will read some of the ones that I've gotten through the years and saved. They've made a difference for me. Many of them have moved into God's full presence, and yet their lives still sing and ring in my own. August 1992. My dearest Nanette, here's the letter that I threatened you that I would write. It's a letter because there are some things I want you to know, and spoken words do not always come out just right and are irretrievable, but wrong written ones can be scratched out and rewritten. First, I want to tell you how much I appreciate that your faith and your happiness in your faith shines through you. And it seems to me, happiness and faith are or should be synonymous. Also, you're pioneering in a profession that women have always lived and worked in, but rather behind the scenes. And stepping out front is never easy, but after all, whoever said life and living it was easy? That's part of it. Her name was Blanche Blue. She was a member of North Cross United Methodist Church back when I used this Bible and hadn't yet learned that if you use packing tape rather than duct tape, it doesn't show up as much on the binding of a Bible. Blanche made a difference in my life. She made a difference in my faith. She made a difference in my understanding in those early years of student appointment, because I was at North Cross where she was a member when I was a seminary student, stayed there through graduation and my ordination. She made a difference in me beginning to understand who I was and who I was to become as a pastor. She was in her late 80s when I went there and turned 90 while I was there. And she's now gone on into God's full presence. Who are the saints in your life who have made a difference? Who have helped you to sing a new song, who have helped you to ring out a part of your life that you might not have found had it not been for those persons. They made a difference in your faith and how you understood God, maybe even in how you understood the community of faith, the community that comes together on a regular basis to worship. Make a joyful noise to all the earth, the psalmist says. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into the Lord's presence with singing. Those saints in your life, I'm guessing, do not hold the trait of perfection. It's not really even a desirable trait, I think, believe it or not, even for saints. Rather, the trait that perhaps they all have is an authenticity. A willingness to see in us what we can't always see in ourselves, and to shine a light in such a way that we hear and see our lives in new ways. That's what Blanche did for me. We come into the Lord's presence. We rejoice with all the earth. We sing with all the saints in glory a resurrection song. Does that happen for you very often? Maybe as you reflect on those folks who have been saints in your life, maybe part of what they do is remind you who you are. Because maybe we've all gotten a little lost in the last year or two, or 4 or 6, or 8 or 10. Maybe we've gotten a little lost in our divisions, and maybe we've gotten a little lost in our meanness, and maybe we've gotten a little lost in forgetting that as people of faith, God has called us into our best selves as a witness to the good news. Blanche's formal volunteer position at North Cross United Methodist Church that she held for over 50 years was a trainer of acolytes. Do you remember acolytes? The children who would bring the light of Christ quite formally, well, sometimes, down the aisle. And Blanche was the one who trained them. And do you know, there was such appreciation for what she was able to do with 3rd and 4th graders and older, that those who had been trained by her as acolytes kept convincing her to continue into her 80s. She retired formally at 90. They kept continuing to convince her to do it through her 80s, even when she said she was tired, because she had made such a difference in their life when she trained them. They wanted their children now to be trained by her. And what was it that made a difference? Kindness, generosity, a sense of humor, and yet an expectation that these children would comport themselves in a way that would bring respect to the faith and to the worship of God. Every Sunday morning, she did indeed teach them how to hold that candle lighter at a 45-degree angle. She did indeed teach them to use their dominant hand to put their thumb on that lever that you raise the wick with. She did indeed teach them how high the flame should be on that lighter as they came down the aisle, that it wasn't to flame so high that it might catch some woman's hair on fire who had put on too much hairspray that day and become a mushroom cloud, which the children always laughed at, as she said. And also not to leave it so short that it would go out on the way, because we didn't want God to think that we weren't glad to be there in the brightness of God's love. So she taught them how to keep their backs straight as they walked, and to keep their heads up and their eyes forward, confident that God was accepting the gift of light that they brought in to the sanctuary. Make a joyful noise, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into the Lord's presence with singing. Somehow, generation after generation of child tried to live into her vision of who she thought they were. You know, she didn't just do that with children. She did that through and with pastors who came through appointments at that church. Young associates who hadn't quite figured out yet exactly how to be a pastor of wisdom and depth. And she loved us also into who she knew we could be. Her song still rings in my life. And she has long since joined the great cloud of witnesses, the saints who have gone before us. Maybe it's a little what she did is a little like what Jesus did with Matthew, the tax collector, today. That was not someone that anyone would have expected Jesus to call into his company. People would have expected the Son of God to want to spend time with, or to expect to become a leader. And yet, as Jesus is walking along, he sees Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he calls him into ministry. And note that this is a story that's couched in between, or sandwiched in between, the healing of a man who is paralyzed and whose friends bring him on a mat. In Matthew's gospel, they don't bore a hole into the roof of a house. They just bring him to meet Jesus, and Jesus heals him. And then after the calling of Matthew, we have Jesus telling the Pharisees that you can't put old wine into new wineskins, that you can't sew an old patch onto new cloth, because finally they're going to have to give up their old ideas to make way for the new, because the new is coming whether they want it to or not. And then he heals Jairus' daughter. But right in the middle of all of that, Jesus calls Matthew. And after the calling, it says, as they were eating in the house, other tax collectors and known sinners came to eat with them. You know, those third and fourth graders who came to be trained as acolytes, during practice, they weren't always completely serious. During practice, they weren't always careful with flames. During practice, they sometimes talked when Mrs. Blue was asking them not to. But she kept training them. The Pharisees say to Jesus' disciples, why is it that your master eats with known sinners and tax collectors? And Jesus overhears them, or maybe he knows what's in their hearts. And he says, a physician does not come to heal those who are well, but to heal the sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. Some of us heave a sigh of relief at that. And you need to learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I wonder if your saints embody that gift of mercy. Maybe not the exact definition that you're going to find in a dictionary or in Wikipedia, but maybe you know what mercy means because of how they moved into your life, and in moments that you probably least deserved it, offered you the greatest mercy. Maybe we know each other's saints because of that. Not perfect. But perfection is not what's required or desired, but filled with a generosity that reminds us of Jesus saying, blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. The end of this note from Blanche says this. See, I never could have said all this any other way, but I do think we need a mirror held up to us sometimes, or else we lose our perspective. Here's yours. And give my compliments to your mother and father for the way they brung you up. I imagine it was a bit challenging, but they did a beautiful job. I truly love you and am so happy our paths crossed. Sincerely, Blanche Blue. Maybe someday, when you and I have joined the great cloud of witnesses, singing with all the saints in glory, singing a resurrection song, someone will pull a letter out. They've folded and kept in a book for over 30 years. And they'll smile when they think about this letter that they got from you, thanking you for the impact you had on their lives and reminding them who they are. And maybe in that moment, the veil between earth and heaven will indeed be thin, and they will, through you, catch a glimpse of eternal grace through the greatest gift of all, even life itself. So may it be. Amen. We come now to light candles. The names that we will that we will say are simply names of those who have gone before us since last year on All Saints' Day. And I know many of you have had other family members die, extended family and friends. And there will be a candle we will light for you to name them in your hearts. And then this year I'm also lighting a candle for those who have passed both here and around the world of COVID, the pandemic. Over 700,000 now in the United States and millions around the world. And as we say the name and as we light the candle of Christ for their lives and as we hear a bell ring, we'll be reminded that the music that God places in each of our lives, in fact, never ends.